The time for a post-Brexit agreement is running out. The negotiators negotiate intensively for a week, often late into the night. And in the evening, they break off the talks for the time being. Now the bosses should exchange ideas about the state of affairs. Can there be a breakthrough at a higher level? The EU's negotiations with Great Britain on the post-Brexit trade agreement are at a dead end now. On Friday evening, the negotiators on both sides announced that they had agreed to pause the talks because of significant disagreements. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and EU Commission President Dr. Ursula von der Leyen will now discuss the future of the post-Brexit negotiations today afternoon. Great Britain left the EU on February 1st. However, it will remain in the EU internal market and in the customs union until the end of the year. Both sides actually wanted to use this transition phase to negotiate a trade agreement. The talks have hardly made any progress for months. Meanwhile, the time for a timely ratification of a possible agreement by January 1st is extremely short. EU negotiator Michel Barnier has held talks with his British colleague David Frost in London since last weekend. After a week of intensive negotiations in London, both sides agreed today that the conditions for an agreement are not in place, said Barnier and Frost in identical statements on Friday evening. Reasons are, as I said, significant disagreements in the areas of fair competition, control of a future agreement, and fishing rights for EU fishermen in British waters, it said. Both sides would now inform their superiors of the status before Johnson and von der Leyen would discuss the situation in this afternoon. According to EU information, the conversation will take place at 5:30 p.m. CET. According to the UK media, British negotiators complained about alleged new demands from the EU. This slowed down the talks. A government spokesman in London said on Friday the talks were at a very difficult point. As I said, Great Britain left the EU on February 1st and it remains in the internal market and the customs union until the end of the year. But the end of the year is very close now and there is not much time left for anything. In the final phase of the talks, Great Britain and the EU increased the pressure again. Ireland's Prime Minister Michel Barnier said he expected negotiations to continue over the weekend. Well, that stopped yesterday, at least on that level. It was the last months. If, despite intensive efforts, an agreement is not reached in time, there will be tariffs and high trade barriers between Great Britain and the continent from the turn of the year. During the week, the British media had already reported euphoric late-night pizza deliveries to the negotiating teams. This was taken as a sign that an agreement could be within reach. A breakthrough is hardly expected before Monday now. If an agreement is not reached by then, the British Single Market Act threatens to seriously disrupt the negotiating atmosphere. In the event of a no deal, the planned law is intended to undo parts of the EU exit agreement concluded last autumn. This, what you all know, is the withdrawal agreement. The House of Lords removed the controversial clauses last month, but the government said they should now be reinserted. Affected is the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol, which is intended to guarantee an open border between British Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which is part of the EU. If such provisions are applied in the law, a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland would be unavoidable. This would make a renewed escalation of violence in Northern Ireland more likely. Until the conclusion of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, a majority of Catholic supporters of a united Ireland and predominantly Protestant supporters of the union with Great Britain faced each other in a civil war that lasted for decades, and that's nothing anyone can want to return. However, London had previously announced that it would restore the controversial clauses of its internal market law, which is due to return to the House of Commons on Monday. The draft law met with violent outrage in Brussels because it questioned parts of the withdrawal agreement, and the withdrawal agreement is international law. And for those who didn't get it, because I read it in the comments, the withdrawal agreement is ratified for almost a year now on both sides. So it's not what some write, we won't ratify that. That already happened almost a year ago. Both negotiating parties would now inform their superiors of the status. It's on Friday before Johnson and von der Leyen discussed the situation today. France threatened to veto the negotiations on Friday. Should there be an agreement that is not good, we would oppose it, said Secretary of State for Europe Clément Beaune to the radio station Europe 1. The French government will make use of its right of veto if certain conditions are not met, especially when it comes to fishing. According to the EU Commission, the fisheries sector has a total volume of 635 million euros per year. The importance compared to other economic sectors is therefore actually low. In Brussels, however, it is pointed out that the issue is a highly political question in countries like France, Belgium and Denmark. Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark and Spain share France's concerns that the conclusion of an agreement should not be rushed. In these countries, there are apparently also fears that Barnier might be making too many concessions to the British in the area of fair competition. EU Council President Charles Michel warned on Friday that negotiations would fail in the event of a veto from the member states. The member states will have to decide, as will the British side, Michel said in Brussels. Member states have to say yes or no, and if either side of the table says no, then we have a no deal. Some member states suspect Germany, which currently holds the EU presidency, of definitely wanting to push through a deal because of its important economic ties with the British. Government spokesman Steffen Seibert stressed against it that the federal government wants an agreement, but not at any price. EU Council President Charles Michel used the same formulation, by the way. And to stress that once again, because that nonsense pops up in the comments regularly as well. The German car industry will not put pressure on Merkel to pass through any deal. They already made it absolutely clear that the integrity of the internal market is far more important to them than the British market, which is much smaller. So, if you really believe in that nonsense, and a little bit France and so seem to think that at the moment too, Angela Merkel will not push through a deal that is bad for the EU. She's almost retiring, but still, she would even get real trouble in her own party if she tried that. No, won't happen. And don't forget, no matter what stance they are playing there, in a case of a big agreement, all parliaments have to agree to this, including ours, and our parliament wouldn't allow that either. The EU wants an agreement, but not at any price, said Michel. It took two to reach an agreement, he added. Great Britain also has a responsibility. The EU is a powerful force when it comes to rules and standards. Great Britain had to decide which standards it wanted in the future. Should there still be an agreement, the EU Commission will present the result of the negotiations to the EU states, probably at the level of the heads of state and government. Once there is consensus, ratification can begin. It is expected that the agreement will be designed in such a way that only the European Parliament has to approve it. That was a statement we could read, and that would mean one thing. If that version really would happen, it would mean that it would be a much smaller deal than we all wanted to have. In addition, formal approval from all 27 states in the Council is required, but this can be done at ambassador level or in a written procedure. In Great Britain, an agreement will probably also be submitted to Parliament for ratification. A deadline for a more comprehensive deal was actually intended for Monday, so that a decision could be made on Thursday at the EU Summit of Heads of State and Government. After that, the European Parliament and the British House of Commons would have to accept the treaty, and afterwards the 27 national parliaments plus some regional. The European Parliament can actually only approve the agreement if it has been translated into all 24 official EU languages beforehand. That would take too long, even if a special session was called on December 28th. Should Parliament and all member states agree, the treaty could, as an exception, initially only be adopted in its English version. Or it could come into effect provisionally in January without the approval of Parliament. The MPs would give their consent later or stop it later. That's the other possibility. Probably the most important trade agreement in the history of the EU would then only be examined very superficially by the representatives of the people. And they are correspondingly upset. Brexit has turned from a tragedy into a farce, said German Social Democrat MEP Bernd Lange. On average, it took us 136 days in Parliament for trade contracts, complains the chairman of the Trade Committee. At the same time, this flexibility means that the talks could continue after Monday. Diplomats and officials in London and Brussels like to point out that there is only one really tough deadline, December 31st. And neither side wants to be the first to get up from the negotiating table and expose themselves to the accusation of being to blame for the collapse of the talks. The question of who will have the buck if it fails is already at issue. A representative of the British government accuses EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier on Thursday evening of burdening the talks with new elements. London blames the pressure from the French government for this. EU diplomats, however, say there have been no new demands. So it's another start of the blame game from the UK side there, because no one really added anything new. The French just stayed on their fishing, and that was a demand they have for a long time now. For now, there's nothing left for us but to wait for tonight and for the conversation between von der Leyen and Johnson. That will be quite interesting. Maybe there's a lot to speculate about. Maybe Johnson just wanted to be the hero that makes everything possible. Maybe Johnson is trying to drag this on as long as he can to play the last minute card. There are so many versions that what could be behind this. We'll only know probably on December 31st, and then we'll have to see what happens. But if you want to stay informed, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and don't forget my other channels. Subscribe there too, please. I'll see you in my next video. Viel Spaß.